Sometimes the stage stops, the music cuts, and Simon Cowell puts down his microphone. And when that happens, you know something extraordinary is about to unfold. This is the story of the night that changed everything, not just for one contestant, but for the man who thought he'd seen it all. The America's Got Talent studio fell into complete silence. 3,000 audience members froze in their seats. The cameras kept rolling, but nobody knew what to film. Simon Cowell, the judge who had spent 2 decades delivering verdicts with surgical precision, was standing at his desk with tears streaming down his face. But how did we get to this moment? How did the most composed man in television completely break down in front of millions? It started 3 hours earlier. Rebecca Martinez, a 67-year-old retired nurse from Phoenix, walked onto the AGT stage carrying nothing but a worn leather journal and a determination that had taken her 50 years to find. The audience was polite but not particularly excited. Another older contestant, another sob story, they thought. Even Simon looked like he was already mentally preparing his next comment. "What's your name, and what will you be doing for us tonight?" Terry Crews asked with his signature warmth. "I'm Rebecca, and I'm going to tell you about the most important day of my life," she said simply. "It's not a song, it's not a dance. It's just a story. But it's the story that saved my soul." Simon leaned forward slightly. In 15 years of judging talent shows, no one had ever announced they were simply going to tell a story. Howie looked confused. Sophia whispered something to Heidi. The audience murmured uncertainly. What they didn't know was that Rebecca's story would expose a secret Simon had been carrying for 40 years. Rebecca opened her journal with hands that trembled just enough to show her nerves. 43 years ago, I was a young nurse working the night shift in a children's hospital in Los Angeles. November 15, 1981. I remember the date because it was the night I almost quit medicine forever. She paused, looking directly at Simon. There was a little boy, maybe 7 years old, who'd been in a car accident. His parents, they didn't make it. He was alone, scared, and the doctors weren't sure he was going to survive the night. I was assigned to his room. The studio had grown completely quiet. Even the cameras seemed to stop moving. This little boy, he kept asking for his mummy. Over and over. "Where's my mummy? I want my mummy." And I didn't know what to tell him. I was 24 years old, I'd never lost anyone, and I was supposed to comfort a dying child. Rebecca's voice cracked slightly, but she continued. So I sat with him. All night. I held his hand, I sang to him, I made up stories about brave little boys who grow up to change the world. And right before dawn, he looked at me and said, "Promise me something, Rebecca. Promise me you'll help other people the way you helped me tonight." Simon's hands had started to shake. He knew this story. I promised him. And you know what? He survived. Against all odds, that little boy lived. But here's what I never told anyone. Rebecca looked directly into Simon's eyes. I never saw him again. He was transferred to another hospital, then to family somewhere far away. For 43 years, I've wondered what happened to that brave little boy. The silence in the studio was deafening. Simon had gone completely pale. But 6 months ago, Rebecca continued, I was watching television, and I saw a man who looked familiar. A man who had that same determined look in his eyes, the same strength I'd seen in that little boy. And when I heard his story about how he built an empire helping people achieve their dreams, about how he dedicated his life to finding and nurturing talent. Simon stood up abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor so loudly it echoed through the microphones. Simon? Terry called out. Are you okay? But Simon wasn't listening to Terry. He was walking around the judges' table, past the cameras, directly toward Rebecca on the stage. The entire production ground to a halt. Producers in the control room were frantically trying to figure out what was happening. Rebecca, Simon said, his voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca Martinez. St. Mary's Children's Hospital. Room 314. Rebecca's journal fell from her hands. You sang Blackbird by the Beatles. Simon continued, tears now flowing freely. You said the broken wings would learn to fly. You said I was going to grow up and help people just like you were helping me. The audience erupted. But it wasn't applause, it was gasps, cries, the sound of 3,000 people witnessing something impossible. You kept your promise, Rebecca whispered. You kept your promise to a little boy you thought you'd never see again. Simon reached the stage and without hesitation, he pulled Rebecca into an embrace that lasted nearly a full minute. The cameras captured every second, but no one in the studio moved. They were witnessing something sacred. I never forgot you, Simon said into the microphone he was still wearing. Not a single day. You saved my life, Rebecca. You saved my life, and I've spent 40 years trying to save others the way you saved me. Subscribe right now if you want to see how this incredible reunion ends, because what Simon does next will restore your faith in humanity. When they finally separated, Simon wiped his eyes and looked out at the stunned audience. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, this woman taught me that even in our darkest moments, there are angels watching over us. She taught me that helping others isn't just a job, it's a calling. He turned back to Rebecca. You don't need to be judged tonight, Rebecca. You've already won. You've already changed the world. You changed mine. And then, without consulting anyone, without following protocol, Simon Cowell reached over to his desk and slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer. The confetti fell like snow. The music swelled. The audience was on their feet, many of them crying as hard as Simon and Rebecca. But Simon wasn't done. AGT, he said directly to the cameras. I want you to know something. This show isn't about finding the next big star. It's about recognizing that sometimes, the most extraordinary talent is simply the ability to change someone's life with kindness. The story didn't end there. Because what happened backstage was even more incredible. Production had to halt for 20 minutes while Simon and Rebecca talked privately. When they emerged, both were smiling through their tears. Simon had made a decision that would shock everyone. Rebecca, he announced to the still buzzing audience, I want to offer you something that's never been offered on this show before. I want you to join me as a guest judge for the rest of this season. Because if anyone understands real talent, real heart, it's the woman who taught me what both of those things mean. The audience went wild again. Terry Crews was speechless. The other judges were applauding so hard their hands must have hurt. But Rebecca shook her head gently. Simon, I didn't come here for fame or fortune. I came here to find you. To tell you that the little boy I met 43 years ago grew up to be exactly what I hoped he would be. That's all the prize I need. She picked up her journal and walked toward the wing, but stopped and turned back one final time. Keep helping people achieve their dreams, Simon. Keep being that brave little boy who refused to give up. The world needs more people like you. And with that, Rebecca Martinez walked off the AGT stage, leaving behind the man whose life she'd saved twice, once as a child, and once again by reminding him why he'd chosen the path he did. The cameras kept rolling for another 10 minutes, but Simon never returned to his seat. He stood on that stage, looking out at the audience, and you could see him processing 40 years of memories in real time. Later, in interviews, Simon would say that night changed everything for him. I thought I was helping people find their dreams, he said. But Rebecca taught me that sometimes, the greatest talent is simply showing up for someone else when they need you most. This is why we do what we do. This is why stories like Rebecca's matter. Share this video if you believe in the power of human connection, and subscribe so you never miss moments like this that remind us what really matters in life. 6 months later, Simon established the Rebecca Martinez Foundation, dedicated to supporting healthcare workers who go above and beyond for their patients. Rebecca was asked to be the honorary chairwoman. She accepted. And every year, on November 15th, the anniversary of the night they first met, Simon sends Rebecca a simple text. Thank you for teaching me to fly. Because sometimes, the greatest performances aren't on stage at all. They're in the quiet moments when one human being chooses to save another. And 43 years later, that choice is still changing lives. But there's more to this story that the cameras didn't capture. What happened in the weeks that followed would prove that some reunions are just the beginning. 3 weeks after that emotional AGT episode aired, Rebecca received a call that would change her retirement forever. It wasn't from Simon directly. It was from his personal assistant, asking if she'd be willing to meet with him privately at his Malibu home. When Rebecca arrived at the sprawling oceanfront estate, she found Simon waiting in his garden, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him on television. He wasn't the confident judge she knew from the show. He was just a man who had something important to say. "Rebecca," he began, his voice still carrying that slight tremor she'd heard on stage. "I need you to know something. That night in the hospital, it wasn't just about you saving my life. You saved something in me that I didn't even know existed." He led her to a quiet corner of the garden where a simple wooden bench overlooked the Pacific Ocean. "For 43 years, I've been trying to understand why I became so passionate about finding talent, about giving people chances. I thought it was about business, about entertainment. But sitting here with you now, I realize it was always about recreating that feeling you gave me, the feeling that someone believed in my potential when I had nothing left." Rebecca listened quietly as Simon opened up in a way that few people had ever witnessed. "After I left that hospital, I was placed with distant relatives who saw me as a burden. I was angry, difficult, probably impossible to love. But whenever things got too dark, I'd remember you singing Blackbird and telling me that broken wings would learn to fly." What Simon revealed next would explain everything about his career, his reputation, and his relentless pursuit of discovering new talent. "Every time I see someone walk onto that stage, whether it's AGT, X Factor, any show I've judged, I'm looking for that same spark of hope I had as a 7-year-old boy. I'm looking for broken wings that just need someone to believe they can fly." Rebecca reached over and took his hand, the same way she had all those years ago in room 314. "Simon, you didn't just survive that night. You thrived. You took the worst moment of your childhood and turned it into a mission to help others find their voices. But there's something I never told you," Simon continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something I've never told anyone." He pulled out his phone and showed Rebecca a photo, a small, worn piece of paper that he kept in his wallet. It was a child's drawing in crayon, a stick figure woman with a nurse's cap standing next to a small boy, with the words, "Rebecca is my angel," written in shaky 7-year-old handwriting. "I drew this the morning after you left my room," Simon said. "I've carried it with me for 43 years. Through every meeting, every audition, every moment of my career. You've been with me this whole time." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the faded drawing. "Oh, Simon. All these years, you've been helping people find their dreams because someone once helped you find yours." The conversation that followed would lead to a decision that would impact thousands of lives. "Rebecca, I want to create something bigger," Simon said, standing up as the ocean waves crashed below them. "I want to call it the Broken Wings Foundation. Because you taught me that even the most damaged among us can learn to soar." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "Simon, are you asking me to help you build something that will outlast both of us?" "I'm asking you to help me finish what you started 43 years ago," he replied. 6 months later, the Broken Wings Foundation opened its first facility at St. Mary's Hospital in Los Angeles, the same hospital where they first met. At the opening ceremony, Simon and Rebecca unveiled a bronze plaque that read, "In memory of all the children who didn't make it home, and in honor of all the healthcare heroes who make miracles possible every day. Remember, broken wings can learn to fly." As the applause died down, Simon took the microphone one last time. 43 years ago, a young nurse named Rebecca Martinez taught me that healing isn't just about medicine, it's about hope. Today, we're not just opening a foundation. We're opening a promise that no child will face their darkest hour alone. The foundation's impact was immediate. Within its first year, they had established programs in 25 children's hospitals across the country. Every fellowship recipient received a small pin shaped like a bird in flight, along with a card that contained Rebecca's simple philosophy. Sometimes the most powerful medicine is simply showing up. And every November 15th, without fail, Simon keeps his tradition. He sends Rebecca a text. "Thank you for teaching me to fly." But now, Rebecca responds, "Thank you for showing the world that broken wings can still soar." Today, the Broken Wings Foundation has helped over 100,000 children and families during their most vulnerable moments. Simon often says that winning awards pales in comparison to the letters he receives from families whose children have been helped by the foundation. "Rebecca taught me that real success isn't measured in ratings," he explains. "It's measured in hope restored." And Rebecca, now in her 70s, continues to volunteer at the original St. Mary's Hospital, still working night shifts when needed, still holding hands with scared children, still singing, "Blackbird," to those who need to hear that broken wings can learn to fly. Sometimes the greatest talent isn't performing on a stage. Sometimes it's the talent for seeing potential in a broken child and choosing to nurture it back to life. Because 43 years later, that choice is still changing the world, one healed wing at a time.